Mr. Chairman, we're here today to discuss the bills we've heard over the last couple of years on medical marijuana. And, you know, my thinking, you know, you had hearings and we've kind of exhausted everybody this year with hearings, and I think we have a pretty good background on what's going on. I think we'd like to look at maybe working on some framework, but I don't know. Maybe should we give Jason a little time to go through?
I think that would be the best.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, you have at your seat a comparison of House Substitute for Senate Bill 158, which the House passed in 2021, the Kansas Medical Marijuana Regulation Act, and then comparing that with Senate Bill 560, which was introduced in the Senate this session, the Medical Marijuana Regulation Act. As with most comparison charts, this is broken down more by policy of the two provisions in comparison of those policies in each bill. On the first page, the effective date, with 158 passing last year, it had an earlier effective date of July 1, 2022, with rules and regs being required by July 1 of 2023. The Senate version 560 has a delayed effective date of an additional year to July 1 of 2023, with rules and regs required by January 1 of 2024, which would be the effective implementation date of the legislation. And then, except that rules and regs for certifying physicians would be required by September 1st of 2023. Both bills contain a state preemption provision that gives the state the exclusive authority over regulating the growing, cultivation, processing, sale, transport, deliver, furnishing of marijuana. Both bills contain the same structure in terms of administration of the act, with it being divided up to Department of Health and Environment with regulation of patient and caregiver registration, the Division of Alcoholic Beverage Control for regulation of the business entities, and then the Board of Healing Arts with regulation and certification of doctors to recommend treatment with medical marijuana. And finally, the Board of Pharmacy regulating and registering pharmacist consultants and regulating the reporting requirements for the prescription monitoring program. Moving on to page 2.
A second, Jason. Here.
Jason, just a quick question on the state of Kansas being the sole grower and furnishing the process of the marijuana. So how do we ensure that other marijuana is not delivered from other states to us for the medical marijuana purpose?
It would still be criminal to process, distribute, sell, and possess marijuana except as authorized by the act. So any other means of obtaining that or possessing that isn't authorized would still be a crime under the state law. Moving on to page 2 at the top, both bills create a 15-member medical marijuana advisory committee to help in developing policies and procedures for review of recommendations regarding qualifying medical conditions. The committee will review those conditions every 3 years and make also recommendations on criminal offenses that would disqualify an individual from licensure. The committee also reports annually to the legislature. It does have a sunset. That sunset is 2026 under Senate Bill 158, and I will note that the sunset is July 1st of 2028 on the Senate version 560. In the next provision, both bills contain provisions prohibiting employees or agents of a regulating agency from accepting gifts or other benefits from any licensee. The violations under the House bill would be a misdemeanor. Under the Senate, the violation could result in loss of position and a criminal felony charge. The regulatory commencement date for both bills, again, because of the delayed effective date, Senate Bill 560 would have the Board of Healing Arts regulations by September 1st, 2023, and all other rules and regs by January 1 of 2024. You can see the House version would have rules and regs by July 1, 2022, and KDHE and Secretary of Revenue regs by July 1 of 2023. Both bills have a website requirement that KDHE put up a website for patients and caregiver registration. The date is simply delayed an extra year under Senate Bill 560 to January, or an extra 6 months to January 1st of 2024. Both bills also contain provisions that make the actions of the regulated agencies subject to the Administrative Procedures Act and the Judicial Review Act. On page 3, these are relevant definitions under the bills. Both bills contain the same definition for marijuana and medical marijuana product. The definition of qualifying medical condition are those medical conditions that would qualify a patient for a identification card and use of medical marijuana. The lists are fairly similar. The exceptions you will note there on the last column under 560. The Senate bill does not specify lupus, but generally includes all autoimmune disorders. It also includes debilitating psychiatric disorders diagnosed by a licensed psychiatrist, and it includes other chronic, debilitating, or terminal condition that, if left untreated, would be detrimental to the patient's mental or physical health. See on page 4, both bills contain definitions of THC and also cannabinoid and THC acid and THC content. Those are the same under both bills. Page 5, this next section of provisions deal with patient and caregiver regulation. Both bills have essentially the same provisions to have the treating physician apply on behalf of the patient or caregiver for registration and certify that the patient has a qualifying medical condition. The patient or caregiver would then also apply to KDHE for their identification card. There are regulated forms of medical marijuana that prohibits the smoking, combustion, or vaporization of marijuana. The plant material THC content would be limited to 35% in its final dispense form. The House has a limitation on THC content of extracts at not more than 70%. The Senate does not have that provision under its bill. And both bills limit patients to possessing a 30-day supply at any one time. The provisions regarding the prohibition on patient cultivation are the same, so a registered patient could not grow their own medical marijuana. They also contain the same provisions requiring parent or guardian consent if the patient is a minor. Regarding caregivers, both bills have the same regulation. The caregiver must be 21 or older unless they are the parent of a minor patient, and then the caregiver must be at least 18. Caregiver can purchase and possess marijuana in the same amounts as the patient, can assist in administration of medical marijuana. A patient may have up to 2 caregivers. A caregiver may serve not more than 2 patients unless approved by KDHE, and the recommending physician cannot serve as the caregiver for the patient. The fees for patient ID cards is the same under both bills. It would be $50 annually unless the individual is indigent or a veteran, and then the fee would only be $25. The fee for a caregiver card would be $25 under both bills. Both bills have a registration fund for collection of those fees and any fines that might be assessed by KDHE for patients or caregivers who violate the act, and those monies would be used to reimburse KDHE for the cost of administration. Again, the registration cards would be valid for 1 year under both bills. Each patient would be assigned a unique 24-character identification number on their card. The House would require that that be electronically scannable ID for allowing retail dispensaries to verify valid registration by scanning the card. The Senate does not have that requirement that it be electronically scannable. And then at the bottom of page 6, both bills contain reciprocity provision. The main difference is the Senate's version would allow both the purchase and possession of medical marijuana if the individual holds a medical marijuana card issued by another state. The House version is just for possession. At the top of page 7, both bills contain same provisions with respect to certification of physicians recommending treatment with medical marijuana. That certification must come from the Board of Healing Arts. There's an annual report to the board on the physician's observations as to the effectiveness of treatment. The physician must complete 2 or more hours of continuing medical education on the treatment and use of medical marijuana, and there's an annual fee of $175 for that certification under both bills. With respect to the restrictions on treatment, there are requirements for a physician to meet in order to recommend treatment with medical marijuana. You see, the physician must have an ongoing relationship with the patient. Under the House version, that must be 6 months prior to recommendation of treatment, unless one of the exceptions applies. The Senate version allows that relationship to be established through the initial office visit. The physician must conduct a physical exam and review the patient's medical records, must report the recommendation to the prescription monitoring program. The physician can only recommend treatment for up to 90 days and renew such recommendation for 3 additional 90-day periods. And so the physical examination must occur at least once a year. And the physician is prohibited under both bills from recommending treatment for themselves or a family member or dispensing medical marijuana. The top of page 8, this next set of policy issues deal with the regulation of the business entities. The first row there is requirements for a license application. Both bills require that a separate license be issued for each location operated by a licensee. There's also a prohibition on ownership interest between a business entity and a licensed laboratory. And so if you're applying for a laboratory license, that's the only license you hold. You can't hold a retail dispensary license or a cultivation license at the same time to avoid a conflict of interest. All licensed premises must conform with the location restrictions. The licensee must have a tax clearance certificate. The House also requires that cultivators demonstrate ability to grow in a secure indoor facility. The House version also requires that they must confirm any foreign financial interest in the licensee. And the House has a requirement that at least 15% of licenses be issued to minority applicants. The Senate version does not have any of those last 3 requirements on its licensee applicants. For ownership requirements, both bills require a licensee be a U.S. citizen, at least 18 years old. The residency requirement is 4 years as a Kansas resident under the House bill. The Senate version only requires 2 years of Kansas residency. They must own and lease the licensed premises. They must not have any disqualifying criminal offense, must not have had a license revoked in the prior 10 years, cannot be a law enforcement officer or an employee of ABC. It's not disqualified because their spouse is ineligible for a license and not have an undisclosed beneficial interest in another licensee. Those are all the same under both bills. Top of page 9, more ownership requirements. The business entity must also submit business organization and ownership interest documentation to ABC, must not be a publicly traded company, must verify that their individual owners satisfy the eligibility requirements. There is a modified residency requirement if there are multiple owners. They must get approval of ABC for all ownership transfers, and compensation arrangements that are contingent on sales, revenues, or cash flow of the licensee are prohibited under both bills. There are location restrictions for business licensees. This includes not being located within 1,000 feet of any school, church, library, or park under both bills. The Senate version does clarify that the church must be located on property owned by the religious organization, not simply leased by it. The school is defined as preschool through 12th grade. The Director does have the authority under Senate bill to not revoke the license of a pre-existing license. Both bills allow for pre-existing establishments to remain and be licensed. The Senate version has a provision that the licensee can petition for an exemption if it is located in an industrial zone and is at least 500 feet from any school, church, library, or park. The restrictions do not apply to educational research facilities. The House version has a provision to allow the Board of County Commissioners of any county to adopt a resolution prohibiting any licensee from operating in the county. Any licensee operating prior to the adoption of the resolution would be able to continue its operations. The Senate version limits that to retail dispensary licensees in the county. All other licensees would be permitted to operate in the county. Page 10 deals with advertising and signage restrictions of business licensees. The House version requires that the Board of Healing Arts adopt regulations to require signage at retail dispensaries to warn pregnant women and individuals with psychiatric and emotional disorders about the adverse effects of marijuana. No such requirement is in the Senate bill. Both bills require that cooperative advertising between two or more cultivators, dispensaries, physicians, or any combination thereof is prohibited. Both bills prohibit the same forms of advertising if they contain false or misleading information, disparage a competitor's product. You can see the list there under both columns. The House requires all ads be submitted to ks.gov for approval. The Senate does not have that requirement, but does authorize the director to require specific disclosures to be made and recommend changes to advertising to comply with the statute requirements. Both bills prohibit retail dispensaries from advertising specific brands or using graphics on exterior signage or displaying any product or paraphernalia that's visible from the exterior. Both prohibit the advertising of prices by cultivators, processors, or distributors. The House has an additional prohibition that prohibits pricing being advertised on highway billboards and also prohibits any marijuana being advertised on a highway that is within 10 miles of the state line if that highway crosses the state line. Moving on to page 11. With respect to cultivation facility licensees specifically, they are authorized to grow medical marijuana in a building designated for such cultivation by the licensee under both bills. They can sell and deliver medical marijuana to licensed laboratories, cultivators, processors, distributors, and retail dispensaries. All medical marijuana must be tested for contamination prior to being delivered or sold. The House version has provisions for expansion of the cultivation area by submitting a plan and a timeline to ABC. It also prohibits licensee from growing medical marijuana for personal or family use or on public land. The Senate version requires a minimum square footage of cultivation be established, and it sets a maximum of 50,000 square feet for cultivation. It also has a prohibition on growth for personal family use or on public land. Regarding laboratories, both bills contain a provision directing the director of ABC to contract with a private laboratory for compliance and quality assurance testing that's required by state agencies. This would be the state laboratory for testing. The contractor would not conduct commercial medical marijuana testing and would not have any conflicts with a licensee, a business licensee, and would consult with the director for developing testing and research practices and regulations. The only difference between the provisions is the date the contract must be entered into is delayed to January 1st of 2024 under the Senate bill. With respect to laboratory testing licensees, these would be the commercial licensed laboratories testing on behalf of cultivators, processors, retail dispensaries. They would have to comply with the testing standards set by regulations. The House has a requirement that by January 1st of 22, they would be accredited by a national laboratory accrediting body That requirement will be pushed back to January 1st of 2024 under the Senate version. On page 12, more business licensee requirements. Under the processor facilities at the top, this would authorize a processor to obtain marijuana from cultivators and other processors, and then sell and deliver it to other licensed processors, distributors, and retail dispensaries. They must comply with all packaging and labeling requirements. The Senate added some language that those requirements would be established by rules and regulations. Distributors would be collecting from wholesale from cultivators and processors, storing the medical marijuana, and then distributing to retail dispensaries. Again, they must comply with all packaging and labeling requirements. The Senate has the as established by rules and regulations language. Retail dispensaries could obtain medical marijuana from cultivators, processors, distributors, and would dispense it to individuals holding a valid patient or caregiver ID card. All dispensing would be reported to the prescription monitoring program database. All labeling would be subject to providing the required information under the statute. All packaging would be child resistant and tamper proof. No medical marijuana could be dispensed through vending machines or via electronic commerce. All employees under the House bill must have an employee license issued by ABC if you're working in a retail dispensary, and the dispensary must contract with a pharmacist consultant who is a licensed and registered pharmacist with the state. The Senate version has those same requirements and also has the packaging and labeling requirements established by rules and regulations. Both bills exempt research institutions from regulation by ABC if they're conducting research on marijuana and its use. Page 13, you see the large block at the top. These are the fees for the business licenses. We'll note, you can see the differences there with the cultivator fees and the laboratory processor, distributor, retail dispensary fees. The House version, all these fees are annual and non-refundable. The Senate version, these fees are biennial. It's a 2-year license, and if half the license fee may be refunded if the licensee is prevented from operating during the 2nd year of their license term. So there's a partial refundability of those licenses. Both bills have a regulation fund established to collect all the fees and fines imposed by ABC and collected by ABC to reimburse ABC for the cost of regulation and enforcement of the act. As noted under the House, the business licenses are 1 year except for a retail dispensary license, which is valid for 2 years. All business licenses under the Senate bill are valid for 2 years. Top of page 14. The top of page 14, both bills contain a requirement that the director establish and maintain a tracking system to track the medical marijuana inventory from cultivation through dispensing to the patient or caregiver. They may do so through a third-party contract. The only difference is under the Senate bill, the director will give preference to a system that includes tracking plants beginning with the plant's vitro genetic origination data. The House bill contains a provision that the director may establish a payment processing system in coordination with the state treasurer to require all transactions involving medical marijuana be conducted through accounts created and administered by the state treasurer. The Senate does not have such a requirement or provision in its bill. The House requires retail dispensary employees hold an employee license. It also categorizes those licenses into associated employee, key employee, or support employee with a staggered fee for the various licenses. Those are valid for 2 years. The Senate version requires employees of any business licensee hold a valid employee license. It does not make any distinction as to category of employee, sets a standard fee of $100 for each employee license, and also has a 2-year term on that license. As noted, both bills require a pharmacist consultant to be employed by a retail dispensary. The Board of Pharmacy is required to adopt rules and regulations for registering the pharmacist consultants. Those are to be in place by July 1 of 2022 under the House bill, January 1 of 2024 under the Senate bill. Both contain a prohibition that the consultant cannot receive compensation that exceeds 1% of the gross receipts of the retail dispensary. And pharmacist consultants must audit written physician recommendations, train employees, and provide oversight of educational materials handed out to patients and caregivers. On page 15 at the top, the Senate bill contains provisions regarding security of the licensed business premises. It requires all licensed premises to be equipped with security equipment and measures to ensure no unauthorized access to restricted areas and there is no theft of product. This includes exterior lighting requirements, video monitoring requirements, controlled access to restricted areas, alarm systems, and the employment of a security manager. Those provisions are not included in Senate Bill 158 and the House version. In the middle row, the Senate bill contains provisions directing the Secretary of Revenue that they are authorized to enter into agreements with tribal governments of the 4 Native American tribes to allow the exchange of medical marijuana with entities located on the reservations. There is a requirement that the tribal regulations of its on-reservation entities must meet or exceed the requirements of the Medical Marijuana Regulation Act and rules and regulations adopted pursuant to it. There is no such provision under the House version of the bill. The House contains a pilot program that directs the director of ABC to establish a pilot program within 45 days after the effective date of the act. The director is to select a company for the pilot program that will be issued each type of business license and will enter into a public-private partnership with a state university to develop and recommend best practices to the director on the regulation of medical marijuana. The Senate bill does not contain any pilot program. Page 16 deals with taxation and distribution of revenue. The bills are the same in that both bills would simply impose a sales tax on the sale of medical marijuana by the retail dispensary at the state sales tax rate. Additional local sales taxes would also apply. There would be no additional excise tax imposed on the sale of medical marijuana, and there is no pharmaceutical exemption for such sales. The tax revenue would be collected and distributed in the same manner as all sales tax revenue. And there are amendments to exempt medical marijuana from the special taxation imposed on controlled substances that are sold illegally. Page 17, these are provisions that prohibit discrimination against patients or caregivers that hold a valid registration card. At the top there, with respect to real estate transactions, the Senate has provisions that prohibit a person from refusing to sell or lease real estate to a registered patient or otherwise discriminate against a registered patient. The House does not contain those provisions. Both bills do contain provisions that no person should be denied custody or visitation time, and no person is presumed to have neglected or endangered a child based solely on them being a registered patient. Both bills contain provisions that no doctor, no physician's assistant, no advanced practice registered nurse, no certified nurse midwife shall be subject to any disciplinary action solely for engaging in professional activities related to medical marijuana. Both bills contain provisions that no person shall be denied an organ transplant because they are a registered patient. The House has provisions that no regulatory body that determines qualifications for licensure, certification, or registration shall require a person to disclose they are a registered patient or disqualify a person based solely on that person being a registered patient. The House or the Senate version is similar, except that it only prohibits the disqualification of the person for being a registered patient. Both provisions do not apply to law enforcement officers, highway patrol, the Office of the Attorney General under the Senate version, KDHE, and ABC under Senate version. The House also does not apply that to the Board of Healing Arts or the Board of Pharmacy. On page 18, with respect to employment, the House has provisions that the employer may restrict possession and use of medical marijuana on business property and may restrict the consumption of medical marijuana by employees while engaged in the performance of their work duties. The Senate has similar provisions. An employer may impose a workplace drug policy that includes testing and discipline for violations. The Senate has similar provisions. The Senate does also add a provision that an employer cannot refuse to hire or take any adverse action against an employee solely because the employee is a registered patient. Unemployment benefits, the House and Senate both have the same provisions. That person is not disqualified from benefits if terminated for misconduct, if that misconduct is based on possession of a registered patient ID card or possession of medical marijuana. The person is also not disqualified for refusing to participate in a substance abuse program if the positive test is due to their use of medical marijuana and they are a registered patient. Both bills also contain the same provision that workers' compensation cannot be denied to an employee if they are a registered patient and were using medical marijuana in accordance with the Act and had no prior incident of impairment on the job in the past 2 years. On page 19, these next sections deal with criminal code provisions. Both bills create a new crime that make it a Class C misdemeanor to transport medical marijuana unless the product is packaged and sealed according to regulations, is locked in a compartment and inaccessible to individuals in the vehicle, or is in the possession of a passenger and cannot be directly accessed by the driver. Both bills can create a new crime that make it a Class A misdemeanor to leave medical marijuana so that it is readily accessible to minors. This does not include minors who are registered patients. Both bills contain provisions to exempt financial institutions from criminal liability for providing services to licensed business entities. Both bills contain the same amendments to the controlled substances criminal statutes so that there's no criminal liability for the possession and transportation of medical marijuana in accordance with the Act. They also reduce the possession offense if the person is not a registered patient but does have a recommendation from a treating physician and is in possession of not more than 1.5 ounces. Both bills contain a provision that no law enforcement officer may enforce the federal prohibition on firearm possession by a person using a controlled substance if that person is a registered patient using medical marijuana in accordance with the Act. Finally, on page 20, both bills rename the Division of Alcoholic Beverage Control to the Division of Alcohol and Cannabis Control. Finally, the House contains a provision that if federal law is amended to move marijuana from Schedule 1 under the Federal Controlled Substances Act, then a certified physician must prescribe medical marijuana as a drug treatment for the registered patient, and it effectively amends provisions of the bill to go along with that policy change. Those contingent amendments are not included in Senate Bill 560.
Senator Fasquez got a couple of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, so on page 18, the unemployment benefits, would a person receiving DCF benefits like food stamps, EBT, would they be allowed the same exemption of person shall not be disqualified from benefits from refusing to, etc.?
I don't believe the bill addresses those types of benefits. It does not provide a non-discrimination protection for registered patients for those types of benefits that they would receive.
So both, Mr. Chairman, so we might want to include that in there too, so that those applying for those DCF benefits won't be denied. And then, Jason, my second question is on page 5. when it talks about the caregiver being required to have a identification card as well. So can you elaborate a little bit more on the requirement for that caregiver?
Yes, the patient at the time they were getting the recommendation from their physician could designate an individual or two individuals to be caregivers. And caregivers would then be allowed, if they get their register and get their ID card, they could go to a retail dispensary and purchase and possess medical marijuana on behalf of the patient, and then could also assist in administering the medical marijuana for the patient under the Act.
Okay, we've got a few more, but go ahead if Representative Barker and your group.
Chairman, that's, we're the same in many areas. I'm glad to see that the Senate probably reviewed our bill first and saw the benefits of accepting our position. Well, I think, you know, in conversations with the Senate, and I think I know some of your desires, but I must offer, I said, we could just take the House version and put it in a conference committee and run it tomorrow, but I'm not sure you're ready to do that.
I think that bill got ruled materially altered.
Oh, but it's still relevant in the House. We had 79 votes. But how do you want to proceed, Mr. Chairman? This is your
Okay.
conference committee.
First, let's, is there any other questions
No?
for
I know both bills.
Jason? Okay, Senator Hildebrand, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, on page, I have at least three that I can think of right now, but on page 13, the difference between the House version and the Senate version, looks like the House is per plant and the Senate is per square feet, 100 square feet. Any idea how many plants can fit inside 100 square feet?
No, I'm not sure, and I think it was raised in the hearing on Senate Bill 560 in the Senate committee that should have been $4,000 per no, it's per 100 square feet, I'm sorry. And no, I'm not sure how many plants could fit. I would have to defer to industry folks as to how many they fit in their cultivation area.
Mr. Chairman, would we be able to have someone answer that question?
I think we could probably get that question answered before the next meeting, okay?
Okay. Jason, my second question. Let me find my next question. Page 14. The House version breaks down associated employee, key employee, and support employee. And I looked through the bill, and I do not see a definition associated with those terms. Do we know who decides what those employees are, how they're classified?
Yes, under Senate Bill 158 that came over from the House, it does define associated employee as an owner or prospective owner, officer, or board member or prospective board member of a retail dispensary licensee. A key employee is the manager or other person responsible for the daily operation of the licensed retail dispensary. And a support employee is any individual employed by the licensed retail dispensary that does not have authority to make operational decisions.
Thank you. And then my last question on page 18, and I know this is a Senate version, but during the hearing we didn't get into it too much. On the exemption where an employer cannot refuse to hire or take any adverse action against an employee solely because such employee is a registered patient or caregiver. Just to clarify, so if someone is operating heavy machinery that requires 100% attention to do their job, if an employer has if an employer has a drug screening process, they could still go through that drug screening process and still be disciplined accordingly to their policy. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Are you done? Jason, I just want to make sure we had the camera piece is still in this, where they have to have the cameras on the grow facilities. I don't know if that was in the House version or not. I thought it was only in the Senate version.
It's only in the Senate version.
I
Yeah.
didn't see that.
It's on page 15 of your chart at the top, under security requirements. The security measures include video monitoring.
Okay, got it. I see it. I overlooked that. 15.
Page 15.
Probably the way I'd like to proceed. Number one, did contact the ABC and ask them on any regulatory things they'd like for us to look at. So I'd like to give you guys each a copy of that. And when we're looking at the framework, I think these are some things that we should look at to make sure we get these addressed. And I'll give Jason, here's one. Here's some more, I guess. What these guys have.
This will be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so I thought these are some things that we need to look at, so I think maybe take a look at the framework, start building off of the regulations and the fees, and go from there.
Could we have Jason kind of make a separate sheet as to what's in the framework with the necessities there and the fees and thing, and make that a separate sheet? Would that be
Yes.
agreeable?
Yeah, that'd be agreeable.
Okay. And I noticed we're both starting in about 15 minutes. We're going to be in our respective houses.
We probably ought
Voting
to
on
get
those.
going and.
Probably need to get, but, the House is amenable to meeting again today.
Let me see what our schedule is. I'll talk to leadership. I think we've got 84 to carry, but we'll find a time to meet later and give Jason, maybe a little bit later today might be better.
I think we're doing some overrides or attempt overrides on some bills that you passed yesterday. So we could say at the adjournment of the second House, or
Let me
recess,
call
not
you.
adjournment.
Let me
Okay.
call you. I want to make sure and give Jason some time to work on that, so.
That works.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
thank you.